Over what interval can your organization still link a cause to its effect? Not how long you keep logs, that's a compliance answer. How long you keep enough correlatable state that an investigation would actually close. For most organizations, it's 18 to 36 months, and it's bounded by log rotation, platform migration, and people leaving. So, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at something, it's a bit of a perspective shift, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
We're pulling from a really fascinating stack of architectural analyses and system postmortems today. And the goal, our mission for this deep dive, is to figure out why time, like literally the passage of time, is probably the most underappreciated vulnerability in your entire infrastructure. Because we talk about mechanisms all the time, right? Memory-safe languages, or zero-trust architectures, network segmentation.
The physical stuff.
Exactly, the physical stuff. But today, we're shifting the axis entirely to time. We're looking at how organizations structurally forget things and how adversaries actively weaponize that amnesia.
Right, because it requires a completely different way of visualizing an enterprise environment. Like normally when we analyze a network's security posture, we sort of instinctively freeze it in place.
Yeah, like a snapshot.
Exactly, snapshot. We look at the architecture, the access control list, Active Directory, all as they exist at one specific second on a Tuesday.
Right.
But systems are living organisms. They move through time. And when you introduce that time dimension, this completely new class of vulnerability emerges. And in the source material today, they call this the institutional detection horizon.
Which I love. I just love that phrase because it implies this hard, almost physical limit, right? Like the curvature of the Earth.
Yes, exactly.
You can only see so far back before everything just kind of drops off. But, and the sources are really careful to point this out, this horizon isn't a feature.
Right.
Like, you can't just buy a software license to extend it.
No, you can't.
It's an emergent property. Nobody actually owns it.
Yeah, and that term emergent property is really critical here. It means nobody in the organization is actively managing it or designing it.
Right.
The CISO doesn't set it in a policy document somewhere. The compliance team doesn't dictate it. It emerges from the friction of daily operations. You know, the constant churn of data and people and software, it all creates this natural degradation of context.
Okay, let's unpack this concept of context degradation, because I think when you just say time horizon, it can sound a bit philosophical.
Sure.
But the actual mechanisms that are destroying this horizon, they are super physical. They're everyday IT processes. We're basically talking about the gap between when an adversary does something in your network and when the consequence of that action actually materializes.
Yeah, if we look at the mechanics of these long-dwell operations, the core issue is that the interval between a malicious action and its consequence, it frequently exceeds the period over which an organization can remember either one of those events.
Wow.
Right. An attacker might compromise the system, plant a subtle backdoor, or alter a foundational configuration, and then they do absolutely nothing.
They just sit there.
They just sit there.
Yeah.
They don't exfiltrate data. They don't deploy ransomware. They literally just let the clock run.
But wait, let me challenge the premise here for a second.
Go for it.
Because my immediate reaction, and I'm sure this is the reaction of a lot of IT directors listening, is that this is ultimately just a data storage problem. Like, cloud storage is cheaper right now than it has ever been in human history. So if we just spin up a bunch more AWS S3 buckets, right, and we mandate that we keep all of our logs for 7 years instead of 1 year, don't we essentially solve this?
You think so?
Yeah.
Right, like we just buy bigger hard drives and retain everything. Exactly what are we missing if we just hoard the data?
Well, that intuition makes perfect sense on paper, but it is the exact reason organizations profoundly misunderstand this threat. Retaining raw logs does not equal retaining memory. A log file without its surrounding context is just alphanumeric noise.
Right, it's just a text file.
Exactly. The sources emphasize a really specific term here: correlatable state. We are not just talking about the ability to grep a text file. We're talking about the ability to connect point A to point B in a way that actually proves causality.
Okay, so correlatable state is like the connective tissue. It's
Yeah.
the environment that the log actually lived in.
Let's look at a really practical scenario. Imagine your SIEM alerts you to a suspicious outbound connection today, and you trace it back to a log entry from, let's say, 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
And the log says the user account service admin prod altered a network routing table, and that eventually allowed this connection.
Right.
So you have the raw log in your cheap cold storage. But does that original server still exist?
Oh.
Has the entire network topology been migrated to a completely new orchestration platform since then? Are those internal IP addresses even assigned to the same departments anymore?
Oh, I see the problem. If the infrastructure literally doesn't exist in the same shape it did 30 months ago, you can't test it.
Exactly.
You can't see what that routing table change actually did to the surrounding services because the surrounding services are gone.
System state is gone. The log is just an orphan now. It tells you a change happened, but it doesn't give you the blast radius or the mechanism of the exploit.
Wow.
And that's just the digital side.
There's more.
Yeah, the most fragile component of correlatable state is entirely human.
Oh, right.
It's the people who remember why a specific decision was made in the first place.
Because the logs tell you what happened, but they almost never tell you why.
Right. Why was that specific port opened on that specific Tuesday? Why did that service account require elevated root permissions for what looks like a routine deployment?
Yeah.
The only place that context exists is in the brain of the engineer who executed the change.
Yeah.
And if that engineer has been promoted or transferred to a different division or they left the company entirely, the context is permanently erased.
It's just gone.
Gone. No amount of cold storage retention policy can back up human memory.
Man. Which means this institutional horizon is basically bounded by the most unglamorous, mundane processes imaginable.
Yes.
It's a log rotation because eventually the compliance period ends and the automated scripts overwrite the old data to save on compute costs.
Yep.
It errs platform migration because, every 3 years a new CTO comes in and decides to move from one cloud provider to another, and that severs all that historical forensic continuity.
Exactly.
And it just standard staff turnover. People get new jobs.
And the adversary is fully aware of this structural decay. They understand that organizational memory is remarkably short and it's remarkably fragile.
Yeah.
If they can embed an exposure deep enough into a system and simply wait, the organization's own daily maintenance will slowly wash away the forensic trail.
Wow. So they don't even have to hide their tracks.
The attacker does not need to deploy some sophisticated secondary exploit to wipe your logging servers or cover their tracks. They just have to be patient.
Yeah.
Your own IT department is going to execute the cleanup for them completely by accident, just by following their standard operating procedures.
That is wild. If we are the ones destroying the evidence as part of our daily hygiene, then our traditional incident response playbooks, which usually assume, infinite data retention and perfect historical context, they're basically works of fiction.
They really are. And this brings us to a really stark realization about how these environments operate. Nobody deleted the evidence. You did, on schedule, for good reasons.
Nobody deleted the evidence. You did, on schedule, for good reason. That is a gut punch of a sentence.
Yeah.
But, okay, if an attacker knows we're going to systematically clean up for them eventually, their only job is to survive until that cleanup happens, right? Which begs the question, where do they hide the initial insertion? Because if they put it somewhere obvious, a human reviewer or an automated scanner is going to flag it, the alarm goes off, and the dwell time drops to 0.
Right, they get caught immediately.
So how do they guarantee their payload survives long enough for our institutional memory to decay?
Well, to understand the camouflage, we have to analyze how review attention operates within a modern organization.
Okay.
Because review attention is a strictly finite resource.
Yeah.
Whether it's a senior engineer reviewing a pull request, or a security analyst looking over an architectural diagram, or even a compliance officer checking configurations. There are only so many hours in the day, and cognitive fatigue is a real biological limit.
Oh, absolutely.
So because it's finite, the organization has to allocate it somehow. And structurally, we allocate review attention by interestingness.
Interestingness. Meaning, we naturally gravitate toward the core business logic.
Right.
The shiny new features, the complex proprietary algorithms that actually, make the company money.
Exactly. We allocate our highest cognitive resources to the areas that matter most to the product's function.
Makes sense.
When an engineer reviews a change to the core transaction processing logic of a payment gateway, they are highly engaged. They read every single line, they run mental simulations of the state changes, they scrutinize it because it's intellectually stimulating and it's business critical.
Yeah, they're awake for that part.
Right. And attackers know this. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, they perform what the research calls attention function estimation.
attention function estimation.
Yes. They actively map out the inverse of that high attention zone. They look for minimum attention regions.
Now, I want to challenge this idea of minimum attention regions because my assumption would be that the most critical parts of the infrastructure get the most attention. Aren't things like build systems incredibly critical? Like, if someone messes with the CI pipeline, nothing ships. How can something so critical be a minimum attention region?
That is a crucial distinction to make. Criticality does not equal interestingness. Think about a foundational concrete slab of a building. It is absolutely critical to the structural integrity. But nobody stares at the concrete for hours a day.
Right.
It's boring. Minimum attention regions are the places in the infrastructure that are so routine, so tedious, and so repetitive that human eyes just naturally glaze over them.
That makes total sense. So what do these regions actually look like when we really get into the weeds of a code base or an infrastructure setup?
Well, the specific locations vary by domain, but the underlying pattern of digital drudgery is universal. Think of these as the most neglected real estate in a project.
Okay.
Like, let's look at code. The minimum attention regions are build systems, CI configurations, test fixtures, vendor dependencies, lock files.
Yeah.
And if we look at formal mathematics, it's notation declarations, definitional boilerplate.
Right.
And in ML pipelines, it's tokenizer configs, data preprocessing, evil harness glue.
Okay, let's pick one of those apart so we can really see the mechanism here. Lock file. Because for anyone who hasn't had the pleasure of staring at one, a lock file is essentially a massive auto-generated text document that freezes the specific versions of all the external software libraries a project uses.
Right.
It ensures that if a developer in London and a developer in Tokyo build the project, they get the exact same versions of every single dependency.
Yep.
But these files can be tens of thousands of lines long, and it's mostly just cryptographic hashes and semantic version strings. It's a wall of gibberish.
Total gibberish.
Nobody, literally nobody, wakes up excited to do a line-by-line manual review of a 50,000-line JSON lock file. It is the definition of mundane.
And that profound boredom is the perfect camouflage. No human reviewer is spending their limited cognitive energy parsing those hashes. They assume the package manager generated it correctly. They see that it passes the automated checks, and they approve it.
Yeah.
And this dynamic is exactly what was exploited in the compression library case that was highlighted in the sources.
Okay, yes, the compression library case. This is the textbook structural example of this. Let's walk through how that insertion actually functioned, because I think it illustrates this concept beautifully without us, needing to read C++ syntax on an audio show.
Right. Nobody wants that.
No.
So the brilliance of the exposure in that case was not some flashy zero-day memory corruption exploit. It didn't violently shatter the system's runtime defenses.
Right.
It didn't look like malware at all. It worked by maximizing a property called conventionality, or idiomaticity.
It perfectly adopted the local customs of the code around it.
It was styled to look completely, utterly ordinary. The malicious insertion was disguised as a routine update to a testing framework and some definitional boilerplate.
Wow.
When the automated scanning tools looked at it, the syntax was perfectly valid. It didn't trigger any heuristics for known malware signatures because it didn't use any aggressive or anomalous functions.
And when the human reviewer looked at it?
Well, put yourself in the shoes of that human reviewer.
Oh.
It's late in the afternoon. On Friday, you have a backlog of 20 pull requests to get through, and you open one that touches a complex testing framework in a compression library.
I'm already asleep.
Exactly. The code doesn't touch the core compression algorithms. It's just modifying how the tests are structured. It looks like the same tedious, necessary boilerplate you have approved 100 times before.
Right.
Your attention function estimation drops to 0. You approve it.
It is the digital equivalent of putting on a high-vis vest, carrying a clipboard, and walking briskly past security into a restricted building.
Yes, precisely.
You belong there because you look like you belong there. There's no forced entry.
None. The insertion happens via an ordinary, helpful-looking contribution. The attacker is just playing the role of a slightly boring open-source contributor.
Man. And this circles right back to the institutional detection horizon we were just talking about.
It does.
Because if you insert a plausible but wrong payload into a minimum attention region, like a test fixture or a lock file, it is highly likely to just sit there undisturbed for months or even years.
Absolutely.
Because nobody goes back to casually reread old lock files for fun.
No, never.
So by the time that code finally executes its payload, The organizational memory of who added that specific line, what the context of the pull request was, why it was approved, all of that is completely gone.
The correlatable state has decayed to dust.
The reviewer who typed "looks good to me" 2 years ago is working at a different startup by the time the alarm finally goes off.
Yep.
The environment itself provides the camouflage. The safest place to hide is the boring part, because review attention allocates strictly by interestingness.
Exactly.
So if an attacker can perfectly mimic the mundane and they completely bypass our attention filters, what happens when they finally decide to act? Like, if they've been hiding in the bureaucracy of the system, what does the activation actually look like?
Well, this brings us to a concept that completely changed how I view system administration. Curator leverage.
Curator leverage. So what does this all mean for the people actually monitoring the systems?
To understand curator leverage, we have to look at the task queue and how modern infrastructure is actually operated day to day.
Okay.
Historically, the relationship between a human action and a system outcome was relatively linear.
Right. 1-to-1.
If a malicious insider or a compromised account wanted to do massive damage, say they wanted to steal 1 million customer records,
Yeah.
they had to take massive observable action. They had to sit at a terminal, manually query the database thousands of times, package the data into archives, and slowly push it out over the network.
Which generates a tremendous amount of noise. It leaves a huge footprint.
Huge footprint. And our traditional security tools are built exactly for this paradigm.
Right. The volume.
Volume-based insider detection looks for a human account doing an unusually large volume of things.
Yeah, if an employee who normally accesses 10 files a day suddenly tries to read 10,000 files in an hour, the system trips a wire and locks them out.
Exactly. High volume equals high risk.
But modern cloud-native infrastructure no longer operates on a linear, manual scale, does it?
Not at all. We have aggressively automated almost everything to achieve scale and speed. We use autonomous agents, continuous deployment pipelines, infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
And because of this automation, we have to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about our architecture.
Okay.
How much autonomous capacity can one credentialed instruction direct before a second human approver is mandated?
That's a scary question. Let's break down what a credentialed instruction actually looks like in practice.
Yeah.
We are basically talking about something as small as typing a single command line prompt or clicking merge on a code repository, right?
Yes. Think about the underlying mechanics of a modern deployment pipeline. A human engineer types get push. That is the entirety of the human volume, 12 keystrokes. But the autonomous system is listening for that instruction. It authenticates the user, and then the machine takes over.
Right.
Based on those 12 keystrokes, the pipeline might spin up 50 virtual machines across 3 global data centers, copy 2 terabytes of production databases, alter firewall rules, and push new application code to thousands of edge nodes.
The leverage there is astronomical.
It's massive.
It is 12 human keystrokes to massive systemic infrastructural change. Archimedes said if you give him a lever long enough, he could move the world. The automated deployment pipeline is the longest lever we have ever built.
I like that analogy. And for many organizations right now, the amount of capacity that single lever can move is essentially unbounded.
Unbounded.
Unbounded. A single authorized command from a single credentialed user can direct unbounded autonomous action. The human provides a microscopic, low-volume input, and the autonomous system amplifies it into a macro-level event.
Which exposes a massive structural blind spot in our defenses. Because if our detection systems are sitting there looking for high-volume human activity, the digital equivalent of a guy sweating while he carries boxes out the back door,
They will completely miss the attack.
wow.
Volume-based insider detection is structurally blind to curator leverage. If an adversary compromises an account and uses it to issue one carefully crafted, highly leveraged command, the human-driven data volume looks tiny.
It looks completely normal.
It looks like one API call. The monitoring tools see 12 keystrokes, which doesn't trip any volume thresholds anywhere.
Right.
The observable human footprint is minimal, but the autonomous impact is devastating.
This connects perfectly to why the sources emphasize that plausible but wrong code costs an organization significantly more than obviously wrong code.
Exactly.
Because if an attacker submits a command that is obviously malicious, maybe it has blatant syntax errors, or it tries to call a known malicious IP address, the pipeline crashes, or a static analysis tool blocks it immediately.
Right. The damage is loud, but it's contained.
But if the command is plausible but wrong, if it's syntactically valid, matches the local coding idioms, and sits in a minimum attention region like we talked about earlier.
It sails right through the review process.
It sails right through. The automated pipeline executes it with full system privileges. The state of the environment is subtly altered, and then the payload just goes dormant.
And the attacker steps away, and the institutional detection horizon clock starts ticking.
It is a terrifying sequence when you line it all up.
Yeah.
You have an adversary planting a plausible but wrong insertion in a boring, unmonitored region of the codebase. It requires only a single low-volume command to initiate, meaning the volume-based detection tools are totally blind to it because of curator leverage.
Yep.
And then they simply wait for our own IT department's routine housekeeping to wipe out the correlatable state, ensuring the investigation will eventually hit a dead end.
It represents a profound structural weakness in how we architect and monitor compute environments. Volume-based insider detection is structurally blind to curator leverage, meaning a single authorized command can direct unbounded autonomous capacity entirely undetected.
So when we analyze these massive systemic blind spots, the danger is that we start treating every theoretical worst-case scenario as an absolute immediate fact.
We do tend to do that.
Right. And we have to draw a hard line here. It's time for our status check on the source material.
Okay.
What is rigorously shown by the data and what is merely a prediction about how organizations behave. We need to separate the observable facts from the forecasts.
This distinction is essential. So let's start with what is rigorously shown.
Okay.
It is an observable empirical fact that the institutional detection horizon is a real, measurable quantity. The structural decay of correlatable state is actively happening right now in every enterprise. We know for a fact that log rotation policies, platform migrations, and staff turnover destroy forensic context over time. That is not theoretical. That is the daily physical reality of IT operations.
Okay.
We also know structurally that review attention allocates by interestingness, and that modern automated systems provide massive leverage to single-user commands. These are shown facts about the architecture.
Okay, so the decay is real, the leverage is real, and the finite nature of human attention is real.
Right.
What is predicted? Where does the research step from observation into a behavioral forecast?
The core prediction lies in how organizations perceive their own capabilities.
Okay.
The prediction is that almost nobody has actually measured their institutional detection horizon. Organizations operate under an implicit psychological assumption that their detection horizon is infinite.
Because of the storage.
Because of the storage. They assume that because they invest millions in a SIEM,
Yeah.
and because they hoard petabytes of logs in cloud storage, they will always be able to piece together the narrative of an incident if they're ever breached.
It's the illusion of infinite memory.
Exactly.
We feel secure because we are generating and storing massive volumes of data, but we haven't actually tested if that data forms a coherent, usable narrative 18 months down the line when the original engineers are gone and the servers have been recycled.
Right. The prediction is that when pressed, organizations will find their horizon is highly finite, and they are vastly overestimating their retrospective forensic capabilities.
So if the horizon is highly finite and our automated tools are creating these massive leverage blind spots, how do we actually find out where our own organization stands before an adversary does?
We need to test it.
Right. What is a practical first step a listener can take on Monday morning to test their own institutional memory? We want to start with a low-cost, low-friction action.
The most effective low-cost action is to empirically test that prediction we just talked about.
Okay.
Try to reconstruct a real minor incident from 18 months ago.
Oh.
Yeah. Pick a brief service outage, a
Yeah.
weird network anomaly, or a documented configuration drift from a year and a half ago, and try to run it to ground today.
Okay.
And this is vital. Do not theoretically whiteboard this exercise in a conference room. Sit down at a terminal and actually try to execute the investigation.
Trace the actual correlatable state.
Exactly. Look for the raw logs. Try to find the exact system states and network topologies as they existed on that specific day. Dig up the pull requests and the JIRA tickets that explain the changes.
And the people.
Right. Yes. Try to track down the people involved and see if they can accurately recall why they made those specific decisions. Do not accept, "We probably have that in an archive somewhere," as a valid answer.
Have to actually touch the data.
You have to put your hands on the correlatable state and prove you can link the cause to the effect.
And when you inevitably hit a wall,
The exact point where you fail is your actual institutional detection horizon. If you hit a dead end at 14 months, because the old orchestration platform metadata was wiped during a vendor migration, then your hard horizon is 14 months.
Wow.
Once you establish that number, you need to put it next to every detection and response strategy you have that relies on retrospective correlation.
Because if your playbook says one thing, but your horizon is another.
Right. If your incident response playbook assumes you can trace an advanced persistent threat's dwell time back 2 full years, but your actual measurable horizon is 14 months, your playbook is a work of fiction.
That is a brilliant exercise because it immediately strips away the illusion. It forces you to confront the gap between assumed capability and actual reality.
Yeah.
Now, what about the leverage problem? The fact that 12 keystrokes can spin up 50 servers and alter terabytes of data undetected? That requires more than just an investigative exercise. How do we tackle curator leverage?
Well, addressing curator leverage requires more organizational friction, which means it's a higher cost action. You need to define a hard leverage threshold.
What does that mean?
You need to sit down with your architecture and platform teams and calculate exactly how much autonomous capacity one credentialed instruction can direct in your specific environment before the system mandates a second independent approver.
Oh, I see. You have to map the potential blast radius of a single authorized action.
Exactly.
If a mid-level developer pushes a configuration tag to a production repository, what autonomous chain reaction occurs? Does it just spin up an isolated staging environment for testing? Or does it trigger a cascading deployment that updates the core databases, alters the load balancers, and pushes code to the public-facing application?
You need to quantify that leverage. Can one single compromised account, without triggering any volume-based anomaly alerts and without requiring a secondary human review, direct massive autonomous action? You have to map the pathways where a low-volume input yields a high-volume output. And you must be prepared for an uncomfortable reality, because as the source material explicitly notes, you may not like that the current answer for your organization is unbounded.
Unbounded leverage, meaning a single compromised credential or even just a single innocent insider error can utilize the entire automated force of the organization's infrastructure without any structural friction to slow them down.
That's the reality for a lot of places right now.
Before we wrap up, consider the systemic implication. If human attention is truly our scarcest security resource, and we are aggressively automating everything else in our infrastructure, are we eventually going to have to figure out how to automate interestingness?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. And what happens to our networks when an attacker figures out how to hack that specific algorithm? It's a fundamental question about the limits of human monitoring in machine-speed environments. Next time, we take this time dimension to its most uncomfortable conclusion, stepping into the one domain where the accumulated quantity we all depend on has never actually been named as a quantity at all.